All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV, and our website where you can listen to the X Zone 724-365 at www.xzoneradiotv.com. And the X Zone Radio Show is being brought to you around the world on the X Zone Broadcast Network, the Good News Radio Network, and radio stations and satellite programming providers right around this great, big, beautiful world of ours. My guest this hour is Dianna Bonny, and Dianna hopes to encourage a better legacy surrounding the epidemic of suicide, which now claims more lives than war, murder, and natural disasters combined. She is an advocate for those, like herself, who are navigating the silent aftermath. Her work is focused on creating a healthier public dialogue and healing the people left behind. Blogger, healing advocate, and BU author, you can now learn more about Dianna's work at livingonthefaultlines.com. Joining me now is Dianna Bonny. And Dianna, welcome to the X Zone.
Hi, Rob. Thanks so much for having me. I love being here.
Well, we enjoy having you with us, Dianna. Dianna, tell me about your story and why you're speaking about suicide.
Well, the primary reason is that I have 3 children, and my life was completely derailed. It'll be 4 years ago, this past August, when I discovered my husband had gotten himself into a lot of trouble, and he took his life. Oh. And I, woke up one day, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 days after that, and looked at my 3 children, and, began to understand the silence and the taboo surrounding suicide was quite prevalent. And I had this very fortuitous meeting with a gentleman who was an acquaintance of mine, probably around 55 years old. And this was probably a week after my husband died. And he had heard what had happened to me and asked me to go to coffee and just, share the story. Mm-hmm. And after I finished everything that had happened, he looked at me and said, Dianna, I have never told anyone this before, but when I was 13, my father committed suicide. And my mother forbade me from ever speaking of it or him again. And then he collapsed onto me and started crying. And I, really in that moment realized that this right here, I was holding the 13-year-old boy, and I had my youngest son at the time was 12. My other 2 children were 15 and 16. And this was, really their future if I didn't proactively step into this experience and really try and change it. So that's really the basis of where the work, kind of started for me.
Why aren't we talking more as a society about this suicide epidemic?
Why are we, or why are we not?
Why are we not?
Ooh, it's such a fearful subject for people. I mean, it's a really interesting, Rob. When you bring it up, people have a tendency to either, step right into it with an open heart, mm-hmm. Or it's almost like they've been assaulted. They step away, they freeze up. And I think a lot of it has to do with just our inability to deal with death in general, and, coming to terms with our mortality. And suicide is something that, really it's always been kind of enshrouded in all of these religious taboos and different things. So now that it's happening more and more, I just don't think people have a language for it. I don't think they know how to speak about it comfortably and, integrate it into the vernacular of society, which we really are going to have to do because it keeps escalating.
I know for a fact, from a personal experience, that suicide knows no age, knows no religion affiliation, knows no color, knows no creed. And why I say this, Dianna, is my uncle, who was, I would say, in his late 60s, had enough of life one day, and he decided to drive his car around the wigwags and the arm that comes down or before, to block traffic from going on train tracks. Mm-hmm. Well, he drove his car around and stopped his car on purpose and waited for an oncoming train to hit him, and that's how I lost my uncle. And I saw firsthand the devastation that followed within the family, firsthand. So right. I applaud what you're doing. And I agree with you that we should talk about this. We should work together as a society in doing something about it. And I hope that you and I can accomplish something tonight here on the other side of this commercial break. Dianna Bonny, please stand by. Exonation Dianna Bonny is our special guest this hour. Her website is livingonthefaultlines.com. That's www.livingonthefaultlines.com. And Dianna Bonny and I will be back on the other side of this 2-minute commercial break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Exonation, Dianna Bonny is my special guest. She is a lady who is doing what she can to encourage a better legacy surrounding the current epidemic of suicide. Her website is www.livingonthefaultlines.com. Dianna, why do you think that suicide is on the rise?
Ooh, that's a big question, isn't it? I think it's so multifaceted because my take on it is that there's just, despite all of this technological connectedness that we supposedly have, this 24/7 kind of internet stuff, I think we're living in a time where people feel more isolated and disenfranchised than ever before, really. And, our youth, we've got a lot of bullying. You look at our war veterans in America where the numbers are huge. Yeah. And, you have to wonder whether anyone is equipped to see and come home and integrate the atrocities of mankind at war. And then you have a huge increase in the baby boomer population, which, your uncle would speak to that, where, people just get to a point and think, is this it? This isn't really what I bargained for. I'm taking care of my kids. I'm taking care of my parents. So I think there's, a multitude of reasons. And it's very unfortunate that, we keep looking at data and statistics. And I think really what we have to do is look more to the human element of what's happening here.
Statistically, what is the number one cause of suicide?
The number one cause in terms of how they actually kill themselves, or the
reason,
depression, or that kind of thing?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know. I know, with Robin Williams' death, there's been a lot of figures thrown out there about mental illness and depression, and I don't have the exact figures. I'm sorry. There's a lot of them out there, but I think a lot of it is depression. And I know in a lot of suicides there are, drug abuse and alcoholism seems to, be a common thread running through it. But the different populations seem to have different reasons that go with them.
Do you think that the suicide of Robin Williams was an eye-opener to society that, hey, there's a problem here, we need to be paying more attention to it?
Well, I would hope so. I would hope that his death will bring, some kind of opening around this, that, there needs to be more attention paid. And I wouldn't say that anyone could have necessarily stopped it. And I think that's one of the hardest things about suicide is that people get wedged between, did I do something to cause this? Did I not do enough to stop it? If only I'd said this or done that. And, with suicide, I think, and particularly with Robin Williams, once they make that decision, I've spoken to some people who've been suicidal, attempted and actually survived, and they said, it is nearly impossible. There's really nothing that would have stopped them if they could have gone all the way. So I hope that that does bring a lot of light on this subject, and that people can start embracing, this idea as something that is happening and something that needs to be explored with compassion and not so much judgment and fear.
So, in your opinion, as being a person who is actively involved in trying to, as you say, encourage a better legacy, why do you think that it is so difficult for people to speak about suicide? Why is it taboo? It's a fact of life. We deal with people who have cancer. We deal with people who are, that are diagnosed with diseases that are life-taking all the time. So why can't we talk about suicide in the same way that we talk about murder, homicide, or any other aspect that finally causes death one way or another?
Well, I think it's an uncertainty. It creates an uncertainty, doesn't it? It's very unsettling to think that someone you know and you think you know well might be considering killing themselves. And then when they do actually do that, why didn't you see that? Why didn't you know that? And, with murder or disease, you have a villain. We have something we can blame. We have, this cause that happened, that the person did it or a disease did it. Whereas in suicide, the perpetrator or the villain, for lack of a better word, is the person that you cared about. And so it's very difficult to blame them. It's difficult to blame yourself. And so, there's a lot of emotional distortion that comes with suicide because people, they don't really examine that. And it is a tough subject. And I think a lot of it probably goes back to historical taboos. There are just things that have these belief systems around them that we've never really taken the time to take apart and question. And I think suicide is one of them. We didn't talk about cancer 20 years ago or homosexuality. And I think suicide is probably up for its evolutionary kind of, trip to the new dialogue, as it were.
I can understand a lot of things in life, but when it comes to suicide, why isn't it treated as if it was the end result of a disease?
Well, it's hard, isn't it? Because sometimes, you have this young woman here in the States who just this weekend, made a decision to actually take, her life because she was sick. And, then you have people, I don't know, Rob, maybe it's because there's so many different contributing facts to different kinds of suicide. Every suicide is unique. And whether it's depression or alcohol abuse or illness, there's so many different factors playing in there that I think it's very hard to trace it back, I guess.
Now, have there been studies on the people left behind and the effects of a suicide on a family?
Great question. Do you know that there really have not been any studies done, which is, again, partly why I'm doing what I'm doing. I've spoken to a couple of top researchers who said that they have really just barely scratched the surface. They've been focused on prevention and why people are doing it and the population of people committing suicide, but nobody's looked at the trajectory of, say, a young child, at 5 or 10, 12, and how that affects their life. And I think they are starting to do it, but it is, you talk about changing your life and changing your kid's life. It's amazing to me that they don't have studies. And I suppose it would be difficult to study on one hand, but it really, it completely changes your kid's life and your life, and I think there probably needs to be some study.
So how would you talk, so how would you talk about it in order to, create a healthy family legacy then?
Well, with my kids, what I did was really stepped into the aftermath with a very open heart and open mind, and I was very honest with my children that I didn't have all the reasons why their father had done what he did and the choices that he made, but I wanted them to be able to explore it out in the open right now, live, rather than 20 or 30 years down the road, with alcohol and all these other things being poured over it, trying to figure it out with, on their own. And I think, it's a scary conversation. There's no question about it. But it's really just understanding to me that this person that has made the choice to take their life, they had free will, and they are now gone, and presumably, depending on your beliefs, out of their pain. And so what are what are we, the people left behind, going to do with that? How are we going to either integrate that into our lives, or what a lot of people do, never talk about it and let it become this entity that kind of controls everything energetically? Because, as we all know, just because they're not talking about it doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Exactly.
And eventually, this unresolved trauma is going to erode the family and the soul. So it's very important to bring it out in the open.
So what are the important factors or the important things to do in the aftermath of a suicide?
Well, I think the first thing for me is suicide creates a void. You have a family unit, or you have, whatever the person is that's there that, is now gone. Mm-hmm. There's a huge void there. And what tends to happen is that people just allow that void to be filled with shame and humiliation and fear, and they don't actively curate and tend to the void and make a mindful choice to say, okay, this person has made this choice, and, I'm going to fill this space with compassion and try and understand the choice and, how does that fit into my life going forward? I think that's really important from the get-go, to give yourself permission, number one, to heal and honor yourself in this experience, and, really take care of yourself when you're going through this, because there's a tendency to just kind of be haplessly blown by the winds of, people pointing fingers and getting carried away with trying to avoid any sort of responsibility. And, then you get lost in the mix, in the aftermath of all this chaos.
So maybe you can help me understand this. I understand the social stigma that may go along with suicide, but what is the difference between a child losing a parent to cancer, or an automobile accident, or a crime, to suicide?
Well, I would say there's a really, really big difference in that, you have a child who is looking to a parent as a role model, as somebody who is, hopefully unconditionally loving them and, guiding them through life.
Right.
And then they all of a sudden make the choice to, essentially abandon the child and say, life is too hard. And, remember, kids, perceptions of things are often quite different to what reality is. But, perception can be that they caused it, or that they should have done something different, or said something different to the parent. And I think they then, adopt this belief system around what the parent has done. Whereas when you have a cancer or a murder, there is a cause that is outside of themselves. And that they're not going to look to themselves as being any kind of blame or reason for that death. But I think there's a lot of different psychological things that go with suicide that are very complicated for kids. Particularly when it's not.
I can understand that, and I can appreciate that. But isn't it time that we say, hey, look, there was not to a child, but to each and every member of society who is old enough to understand that, hey, there was an underlying problem here. That we just can't, it's part of life. So how do we, this is the question I'm going to leave you with before we go to our break that I have to take in a few seconds here. How would you prescribe to society on how to better understand suicide? Okay, so think about that. I'll give you a few minutes. And we'll be back on the other side of this break with the news. Exo Nation, Dianna Bonny is my special guest. We're talking about the suicide epidemic. Her website is livingonthefaultlines.com. And we'll be back on the other side of this news break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Check us out online at www.xzoneradiotv.com, where you can listen to the show 24/7, 365.
This is Elizabeth Joyce with Stargazing Week of November 3rd through the 8th, 2014 with the X Zone. Are you still adjusting to setting back the clocks? At least we all got that extra hour sleep. Sunday is a soft day, one to rest and relax. At least we're through Mercury retrograde in 2 eclipses. The tone changes on Monday with an Aries moon, as we expect upsets on Election Day when the moon aligns with Uranus. Should prove to be interesting. Focus this week is on the full moon on Taurus on Thursday the 6th. The full moon is opposed by Saturn, Venus, and the Sun. You will be called into your emotional depths in order to restructure your values. This full moon is complicated and can be stubborn, intensely sensual, and may uncover feelings you have about relationships, secret attitudes, and what you've been hiding about your money issues. Taurus rules the throat, so is there anything you've had a difficult time swallowing? This has been going on all year, but we are in the final stages of Saturn in Scorpio, so it's time to clean up the theater and get ready for the new show, commencing on Christmas Eve when Saturn moves into Sagittarius. Beginning on the weekend, assertive Mars aligns with karma-giving and rebirthing Pluto, and this can bring in some negative, violent, and destructive moments. Give a wide berth on the road, as well as to people who are impatient or angry. Mercury plunges back into Scorpio as well, bringing in communications that are secretive, manipulative, and accompanies the green-eyed monster, Scorpio. This is the best time to file for bankruptcy or foreclosure, as well as to be sure that your insurance coverage is up to date. On the positive side, you can apply your physical energy through meditation and visualization to transform your life at core levels. Pay attention to any anger and resentment that appear within you, and don't try to force any issues as others may have the upper hand. The moon moves into Gemini on the weekend and brings talking, communications, lots of short trips, quick errands while you're keeping on the move. It's not the weekend to begin any focused projects, so just relax and take in a movie. Ideas are flowing now, but the ideas may not manifest.
And for more information or a private one-on-one consultation with Elizabeth Joyce, visit her website at www.new-visions.com. That's www.new-visions.com. Exonation, my guest this hour is Dianna Bonny. We're talking to Dianna about suicide, and there seems to be an epidemic of suicide. If you'd like more information about Dianna and the work she does, www.livingonthefaultlines.com. That's www.livingonthefaultlines.com. All right, Dianna, so how would you prescribe society to understand suicide?
That's a big question, isn't it? I guess I would offer up that from my conversations and what I understand about it is that it's, the person who's in that space really has come to a place where they're seeking relief. They're in tremendous pain, and they no longer are able to connect to any other way out. And suicide, and the other side represents that to them. So, when someone once described it to me like a horse on a racetrack with blinders, that, all those horses see is the finish line. And somebody who has made that decision to take their life is in a similar situation. So I think, unfortunately our society is, we're living in a time of sound bites and quick fixes and 3 solutions to, your life, and people really don't take a lot of time to step back and contemplate anything, with any depth. And I think suicide really requires kind of an expanded emotional bandwidth, as it were. You really have to try and step into the other person's shoes to understand where they're at. And I met a kid about 6 months ago when I was at a media event in New York, and he overheard me talking about my story, and he came up and he said, could I talk to you for a few minutes? I've been thinking about killing myself. He was probably 25. I think about killing myself every day, and I don't know what to do. And I said, look, I'm not a suicide prevention expert, but, do you call the hotlines? And he said, I've called the hotlines, and they just tell me to get over it. My parents tell me to stop thinking about it, but I don't know what to do. And I said, well, have you ever thought, has anyone ever mentioned meditation or energy work, like tapping, where you tap on the meridians of your body? And he had never heard of any of this stuff. And I said, well, your whole body is energy, right? And you have blocked energy from whatever emotional traumas you've suffered and different things. So he got that concept because he did karate, and he was very inspired by it and said he was going to go check it out. So, I think going back to how to understand suicide, I just don't think people have really stepped into a space where we're thinking of the body as energy and trying to understand all these the traumas that we encounter in life as being things that can actually get us to a point where life seems too overwhelming to go forward. And if people aren't taught ways to release that energy or unblock it, I think then suicide can become the only way out of their pain, the only way to get relief.
What does a physician-assisted suicide tell a person who's contemplating suicide? Does it tell them that it's, if a physician is going to help some other people with diseases or who are facing, death in their own life, how does this affect them? Is there a rationale behind it?
So are you asking what does the doctor tell the patient?
No. What I'm saying is, if somebody is contemplating committing suicide, and we now have several states where physician-assisted suicide is legal, does this give them, in their own mind, a justification for continuing what they're planning?
Well, it's certainly the argument. I've heard that, and with that young girl, that Brittany Maynard.
Right.
A lot of the stuff on the internet has been back and forth about that, and I think it's probably kind of a similar argument to legalizing marijuana. I mean, the argument is that everybody's going to go out and start smoking pot, and yet, we have legal alcohol, and you don't have everybody drinking. So I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I mean, perhaps if you were thinking of doing suicide, you could use anything to justify doing it. And if there are physician-assisted suicides, I suppose one could use that as a justification. But I'm not sure about that.
Okay, so how do we put an end to this suicide epidemic that we're seeing? What can society do? What should the authorities do? What should the medical community be doing?
I think a lot of it has to do with going back to kind of old school values of connecting with people and really trying to, as far as healthcare goes, I think all of us here in the States know that, you go to a doctor and they spend all of 2 or 3 minutes with you, and, they don't even put a stethoscope on you anymore and ask you, questions that might lead to what the problem truly is. And if you look at some of the professions, doctors and dentists have one of the highest suicide rates. In fact, dentists have the highest suicide rate, I believe, in the medical profession. And, that's kind of an interesting thing to contemplate. What does that speak to? If the people who are supposed to be taking care of us are taking our lives, well, what does that indicate? And to me, it indicates a lack of connection and really a kind of a deterioration of the social fabric that I think really the only way that we can start putting it back together is by getting back to the basics of family and connection and community, and really trying to listen to people when they are speaking about their pain and not turning away because it's uncomfortable. These things are very uncomfortable to talk about, but we have to learn to tolerate that discomfort in order to rebuild society.
What about the schools? Should they teach more about suicide prevention, what to look for? If your friend shows any of these symptoms, talk to them, try and get to see what the matter is, get them to a health professional, report them to a teacher. Should there be more done at the scholastic level?
I would think there could probably be more support there. I mean, I don't know on a level of, I haven't had a child attempt suicide. I've only come into the schools from the angle of having, trying to get support for my children, on a parental level of, which is kind of different. But, school didn't have a support group at the time when we went in, and when we went in and set it up, there were quite a few kids who ended up coming to the support group, which was great. So I would say, yeah, I think, there probably are things that people can do the schools can do, to create a community and a sense of, hey, if you are feeling disconnected and lost and you need help, here's a place you can go without feeling shame or without feeling like you're going to be judged, and we will get you the resources that you need.
What is it that you're trying to accomplish with going out, talking to people, these different media events? What is your goal?
My primary goal is, because my children are now part of this population of people left behind, it is really trying to open up the conversation for them so that it's not something so taboo. I would say that, like I said earlier, we didn't talk about cancer 20 years ago. We didn't talk about some of these other issues. I think by bringing the conversation out in the open, it's going to give my kids a place where they're not going to feel so isolated, and other kids, because it's a huge population, Rob. I mean, everywhere I go, and it's because I have a tendency to talk about it, when I say what happened to me, invariably half the room or more will say, oh, me too, my brother, my sister, my father, my mother. And it's always, 10, 20, 30 years ago, and we've never talked about it. And it's quite alarming, that there's all these people out there who have never had their, this pain addressed in any way. They've just suffered silently. So I think those are the people that I'm really trying to open the space for, so that they don't have to just suffer in silence and try and make sense of something which is really quite senseless, particularly when you're doing it on your own to a large extent. But when you can do it in the open, you can put it in perspective and create an understanding of the person who made the choice, as well as where you fit into that and how you can go forward with your life.
So how would this be accomplished? Just by getting together, talking? Having group sessions, bringing in psychologists, bringing in clergy? How would you see this being done?
I think all of those methods. I mean, I would love to, start creating really a movement and bringing people, into, if you look at movements like, say, the breast cancer awareness or Live Strong, or some of these movements where you previously, nobody knew anything about, these things. I think there has to be, an awareness created around the actual population, because most people don't think about the people left behind. And that's really my wheelhouse. I mean, there's a lot of great people doing, wonderful work on prevention and all these other things, but not a lot of focus on the population I'm speaking to. And, I think events, creating, an event and having, celebrities who have been affected by it start talking and how it affected their life and how they've managed to, handle it or heal from it. And, just creating those little ripple effects out there. And hopefully then it can kind of spread and grow and give people a sense of community is really, I think, what it comes down to, that they're not alone, and that there are, this trauma, which is huge when it comes through your life, is not something that has to become the defining moment that the rest of your life is tethered to like an anchor in the ocean, and you can never kind of move away from it. It's just something that you're stuck to. And, by talking about it and creating discussions and bringing in, like you said, clergy, healthcare, different kinds of voices to it, so that people have different sorts of options and they can see possibility again. I think that's what it really comes down to.
What is there out there presently?
Well, not a lot that I've found. And the people that I've spoken to, it happens to you, and what there is kind of a frantic search on the internet, and there's some support groups, and I've gone to a number of support groups, and they're all very well-meaning. But what I have found, as well as quite a few people I've met with, is, they tend to cycle around the pain. There tends to be, they're in there 5-10 years, and they're still talking about the event that happened 5 or 10 years ago. And I don't think that is necessarily healthy. And this is nothing against support groups, because I think you have to find what works for you. Yeah. But I think they're, giving people some, idea that you can take this event and you can dismantle it, and that it doesn't have to be everything that your life cycles around, for your entire life.
But you just said a few minutes ago, and that, it seems that in these support groups, people have been there for, years, and they haven't gotten over the event yet. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you were to form this movement, wouldn't you be doing the same thing by keeping the event in front of them all the time?
No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about doing is giving people resources to, number one, to understand there's a community, a population of people out there who are going through the same thing they are, which is very reassuring. You talk to any breast cancer survivor, and one of the first things they'll tell you is that knowing other people have been on their journey and being able to identify with them is a huge part of their healing. When you're in this population, it's very hard to identify with anyone because they're invisible. They're very difficult to find. And, when I say talking, what I'm talking about is a bigger scale of giving people resources, teaching them how to meditate, teaching them some of these different modalities that they can help process this energy and move it through. Not sitting around in a big support group and talking about how awful this was and, how life is never going to be good again.
Isn't it a possibility that, like you were saying, that this is one way that some people handle grief, and it takes longer for some people to get over the loss than other people? So how do we gauge who is right and who is wrong, which method works, which method doesn't? We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue and wrap up this hour here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, and my guest this hour, Dianna Bonny. We'll be back on the other side. So whatever you do, X Zone Nation, don't go away. And if you missed a show, you can always go to the archives at www.xzonearchives.com. That's www.xzonearchives.com. Dianna Bonny and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break. So whatever you do, don't go away. Exonation, Dianna Bonny is our special guest. Her website is livingonthefaultlines.com. Dianna, tell me about your book.
My book is in the process of being finished right now. I had it edited, and I'm hoping to get it out to agents in the next month or so. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh, so it's not out yet. I understand. What's it about?
It's really the story of what happened and kind of living an unconscious life and turning away from things that you see but you don't want to see, and what can happen. And it's really it's about healing. Going back to your question about trying to get these people to make this choice, I think that healing it doesn't happen by chance. It is a choice, and being a victim or suffering it can be very powerful, and I think people get addicted to it because it's a place that you can garner a lot of power, quite frankly. And so I am fully aware that not everybody is going to hop on this train with me. I don't it's like addictions and different things. So people have to make the choice and say, I want to feel better, I want to be healthy, and those are the people that I'm speaking to.
Why don't you think that's the attitude they have automatically after the grief period that everyone goes through? Because life goes on.
Well, as you said, grief is hard, and I would never take anyone's grief away from them. Sure. Everybody has to do it in their own way. And, when you say to somebody, aren't you over it yet, which is often said to people, it takes as long as it takes. But I do think there are proactive things that we can do, to foster it and cultivate it and help it along, as opposed to sitting in a room, talking about the same story over and over again. I do think that our healing can happen if we make that choice and set an intention, that that's what we want to create.
But isn't it possible the people that are sitting in the same room talking about it over and over again are in their own way solving this grief? Or communicating or being with other people who have gone through the exact same thing. Many authors I know write about their experiences as a method of healing. So how do we say, and you know what, I would never say to somebody, aren't you over it yet? Because I think that's the worst thing you can say to anybody. Anybody. Yeah. If it takes you 5 years, if it takes you 10 years, if it takes you 5 minutes, whatever the case, that is your decision and your decision alone. So I think that
I agree. No, I absolutely agree.
I think that there's a lot that needs to be considered in this entire scenario. I love what you're doing, and God bless you for the great work that you're doing and your dream.
Oh, well, thanks, Rob. I really appreciate you having me on.
It's been a great pleasure having you on. Please do me a favor. When your book is out and available, contact me. I'd love to have you back on at that time.
I will. I will do that. Thank you so very much.
Dianna, to you and your family, the very best. And once again, I look forward to the next time you join us here in the X Zone.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Take care of yourself, Dianna. What a lady, X Zone Nation. Dianna Bonny is her name. And her website is www.livingonthefaultlines.com. That's www.livingonthefaultlines.com. She is a blogger, a healing advocate, and a soon-to-be debuting author. Now, we've got to take a commercial break, but when we come back on the other side of the news at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour, we'll be talking more about the things that we talk about here in the X Zone, the strange, the bizarre, how we can help each other, how we can help others, positive things in life. And yes, you know what? We are our brother's keeper. We truly are. I'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.